All right, welcome back to Talking Shop. This is the 18th Sunday after Pentecost. We are looking at James. This is James chapter 3, verse 13 through chapter 4, verse 10. There's a lot of stuff in this text, and you probably won't be able to cover it all, but
you'll be able to do law and gospel.
And that's what matters, yeah. Do law and gospel. Give them the goods. Make sure they hear about Jesus today. This is a law-centric text, and that is James, right? His epistle is definitely very law-heavy. But don't forget to remind your people that their identity is grounded and rooted in Jesus and in their baptism, and that they are loved by God. And all of this stuff that James is like pushing us onto is for the sake of their neighbor. So, subscribe, and God bless your preaching.
I'm alone in every way, yet I'm still welcome in the arms of the
This is proper 20, assuming that you care about those things and those numbers. But today we're talking about James chapter 3, verses 13 through chapter 4, verse 10. So we'll just get started reading in chapter 3. So beginning at verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. I think 14 probably is helpful too, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth.
I think the folks who find themselves wise, and I think the folks who other people look to as wise kind of have that bitter jealousy and that selfish ambition. They're looked up to. They're well respected in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you have wisdom, then everybody else looks up to you. You're kind of the chieftain in the area.
Yeah.
Right? And so James is saying, if you think you're so wise, why don't you be meek instead?
Yeah. And remembering that this is written to church leaders.
Right.
And in the previous pericope, he tells them, not many of you should become teachers, brothers. So this is right in line with what he just said, just 10 verses earlier, 13 verses
Lest you
earlier.
get a big head with all of your wisdom.
Mm-hmm. That's really easy to do, and we've talked about this before, probably when it was just us on here, especially with our church body, and our pastors are the most educated pastors in the community. It's really easy for us to get a big head,
right,
about our worldly wisdom,
right,
and you can go back through your pedigree of all the things you learned in undergrad, and
right,
I studied philosophy and psychology and theology, and we've got master's degrees, and oh my gosh, right. I think my hat just got a little tighter.
Right. Is it a matter of you boosting yourself up and promoting your ego?
Yeah.
Or is all of that education for the sake of proclaiming the gospel and you get no credit and you get no glory? Right?
I think it's that.
That's what it should be.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
In that we do those things for the sake of the proclamation, because adequately, sufficiently, and correctly proclaiming Christ is really important.
Yeah.
But sometimes we let our egos get in the way of that, right? We show up to a community meeting, we are in the community, and we know that we're probably one of the most educated pastors in the room.
Or people in general.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're using that to boost your own ego and not to proclaim Christ, there's a problem.
Yeah. Humility goes a long way.
Yeah.
He goes on, though. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and self-ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice.
I think of people that I've worked with, people that I've interacted with who thrive in drama. They have to have drama in their lives.
Yeah.
And, right, what does that normally come from? It normally comes from, right, this selfish ambition, jealousy.
Yeah.
These real earthly things that are centered on them and how great they are.
Right. Or even on the other side, like they feel so that way about themselves, and somebody maybe questions them and they become vile, right, in the moment.
Right.
And their jealousy starts seeping through their pores, and you can almost smell it in the room when somebody's angry.
Right.
But James is calling us as pastors, as church leaders, to not have that among us.
Yeah.
To not even allow that to be part of our discourse.
I think we very quickly, we're okay with, all right, it's earthly, it's unspiritual. And then we'll probably just gloss over the demonic part.
Yeah.
But I don't know that we should. Right? Like, the text says what it says. But if you're actually preaching Christ, right? You're preaching law and gospel, right? Less of you, more of him. I think that proclaiming Christ makes demons really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Probably not going to want to stick around, right? But this jealousy and pride is the opposite of that. It's more of me, less of Christ crucified for the forgiveness of sins, more of my ego.
Right.
And so, in a sense, these things are contrary to what the church is supposed to be about, right? Namely, Christ and him crucified for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he means unspiritual in the sense that it's not from the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Because I would maybe even, like, if I was teaching this in a Bible study, I would probably say something like, well, what I think what he means there is the worldly stuff, like, that's spiritual too, but it's not the spirits you want to be communing with.
Right.
Right. The spirit of this age is no different than the spirit of the age of when the scriptures were written.
Right.
Right. I've probably brought this thing up before, but Mark Driscoll had that series a while back. It was called Old Demons for New Times. That's like all the same issues they were dealing with back in the Old Testament. We deal with that stuff too.
Yeah.
We're just not worshiping at Baal and Asherah.
Right.
We have Pornhub and...
Right. They've gone into the Spirit Halloween store and just gotten a new costume.
Right.
It's still the same old demons. They just have a new mask on.
That's right. And so, like, Dr. Hartung, did you ever take any classes with him?
No.
His spiritual warfare class, the first thing he said, and it was like the drum he beat the whole class, was everything is spiritual. It's either good or bad.
Yeah.
But it's everything is spiritual. So, and Paul even talks that way, right? We are at war with the things in the unseen places in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And
in that sense, I included this in the sermon a couple of weeks ago. Lord's Supper is spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
Right? Like, where Satan thrives and is going after our disunity. The Lord's Supper is this act of unity, both with God and with each other. Yeah. That Satan just despises.
Yeah. Communion is unity.
It's like a common union.
Yeah. Yeah.
For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace.
Right. I might ask the question, how is peace made? What does the Bible say about how is peace made? Or how does God make peace with us?
Ultimately, through the death and resurrection of Jesus, right?
There you go. And so that's where we funnel everything through. Like we were talking about that earlier with the word meekness.
Yeah.
And like you could say meekness is, yeah, you have the ability to be dangerous, but you choose to be peaceable. But I think that does kind of fit here. And maybe we might disagree on that a little bit, but that's what he's talking about here, James, right? Wisdom from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits. Like, I just keep going back to this phrase in my head of, you're not gentle if you don't have the capacity to be violent.
Right.
You're just lame.
Right.
Right. And I really think that's the point, that we have the capacity to do those things, but we choose to be gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits. Like, how many times in your time as a pastor, you've only been in one parish, but so you don't need to oust anybody, but like you've probably had situations, and I could even say I've had dozens of them, where you get into disagreements with people in your church, and like, we as pastors who James is writing to are held to this higher standard of being peaceable and being even keel and not blowing our top off when we want to.
Right.
And that's probably one of the hardest things about being a pastor, personally for me, is keeping my temper in check when I don't want to, because people are wild sometimes. You just don't,
Right.
You just can't believe some of the things people say and do. But James is calling the church and the leaders of the church to exude wisdom that is from above.
Right. You have to pick your battles, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's how I would say that and how I handle that.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that I would find irritating, frustrating, not the best practice.
Yeah.
But that's not a battle worth fighting.
Right.
There are bigger battles worth fighting, and that's where I want to put my energy, because some things are a big deal and are worth rocking the boat over.
Yes. Carpet color is not one of them.
That's really not one of them.
Yeah.
Or whether you have carpet. I would advise against it, but that's my own opinion, right? That's not something that I'm gonna have a fight about, right? The importance of preaching Jesus, the right administration of the sacraments.
That's right.
Those are big deals.
Yeah.
Law and gospel, that's a big deal. So, yes, those are the hobby horses that I'm not going to be peaceable about, so to speak. Right? That's probably not the right way to say it, but right? Pick your battles.
Yeah. And James goes on to talk about
contend for the truth, right?
Right. Yeah. He goes on to talk about quarrels and fights that happen among us. What causes them, these quarrels and fights that are among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask, and you ask and you do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions.
You adulterous people! Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? And we'll pick that back up in a second. But, right, I think it's going back to my own selfish desires, right? My passions, what's important to me, is contrary to this common unity that we have in the church that God has created in us and brought us together, right? That's what causes the fights, is your own passions.
Right. It's almost a rhetorical question. As I read through this, it seems like he doesn't even need to answer it, because he just said it a moment ago that these are the things that cause quarrels and fights among you. Because we get passionate about the wrong things.
Right.
Like how full the communion cups are.
Right.
Or what color the wine is.
Right.
my home church, there was that debacle when I was a kid. They used white wine because it tasted better. And people are like, it has to be red because Jesus' blood is red. That was a passionate fight within the life of the church.
Praise be to God that you're having communion.
Yeah. Yeah. Every week.
And that you're using wine.
That's right. That's right. Not Welch's because it didn't exist back then.
Right. But is it about your passions or about what God has called you to? Right? Choosing your battles. Is this just something that I'm passionate about, or is this something that God has said?
Yeah.
And that we need to take seriously, right? There's a distinction there. I think spending it on our passions
or our pleasures is what the footnote even says, like the more literal is that it's your pleasures.
Right. Is kind of an American critique, right? And we have this ultra individualism and the pursuit of my happiness, right, at the cost of everything else. And yes, that is the American way, but that's not the way of Christ.
Right.
To have my desires, my passions at the expense of everything else.
Okay.
Right. Christ calls us to put our passions aside for this peace.
Yeah. Yeah. And that we have peace in him.
Right. And essentially, when you are chasing after other things, like your own passions and your desires, that makes you an adulterous people. You are chasing after other gods, maybe even demonic other gods.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that is the heart of where this comes from. Right? Back to the Old Testament, right? The church has always been a whore. Right? God has said, you are my people.
Yeah.
And they said, yes, you are our God, for about 5 minutes until we start worshiping a golden calf or some other god, right?
Yeah.
And so the church today isn't all that different.
No.
In that he has claimed us as his own in our baptisms, right? By name, has called us, chosen us, elected us. And we're like, yeah, that's a great thing to do on Sunday morning. That's all fine and dandy.
Right.
And we'll show up to Bible study, send our kids to confirmation if it fits around our other schedule.
Right.
These other things that we're chasing after. Right. And that's not just an indictment on people, but us pastors are guilty of it sometimes too. Right?
Sure.
If we want a big congregation so that we can boost our egos, right? Like, we want the fame and glory, and we want to be awesome, and we like the accolades, right? Like, ours, things we chase after are just different, but right, our temptations are what they are. But really, you're chasing after other things that are not the triune God. Everybody's still trying to fill that cross-shaped hole in their heart with everything other than the death and resurrection of Jesus.
That's right. That's right.
You want to pick up the second half of verse 4?
You adulterous people, again, don't be whores. Follow the true God. He made you his own. But he says, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? I always have trouble with that word. Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Should I keep going? Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says he yearns jealously over the spirit that he has made to dwell in us? But he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God oppresses the proud, but gives grace to the humble. I think that's a good place to pause. So chasing after, like you said, like even if it's
worldly wisdom, worldly riches, however the world defines success, that you've climbed the corporate ladder, that you have so much in your 401k, that you drive a certain year of car, that you have a house that's so big, right, that you can go on vacation, all of these things that the world measures as success, right? You finally made it. You're better off than your parents, whatever those status things are.
Right.
Right? Like, your parents sacrificed so that you could have a better life, and now you've sacrificed and you have life better than your parents, and your kids are going to, right, be at this better place.
Yeah.
All ways that the world defines success.
Yeah.
And that we give worldly glory for.
Mm-hmm.
Great job. You worked hard. You've graduated. You have your certificate. You're going to a big church because you're a good preacher.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those are all worldly things that we would chase after.
Right. And it's, as Solomon says, it's all vanity.
Right.
It's all a chasing after the wind.
Right.
And it's so funny that, maybe not funny, maybe ironic's a better word. Like our world hasn't, or our culture hasn't figured this out, but Solomon figured it out like 10,000 years ago.
Right.
Right. He's like, I've had it all. It's all vanity. It's all chasing after the wind. And if you don't know what chasing after the wind means, just go outside and chase it.
Right.
And see if you can catch it.
Right.
And then you'll get the picture. But at the end of the day, chasing after your passions, and like that's almost the mantra of our culture, like follow your heart, follow your passion. But what if your passion leads you away from God?
Right.
That's a bad place to be, both in this world and in eternity, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's ultimately on the line here, is
whatever your salvation is, whether it's your own passions or desires or science, right? All of these things are chasing after something that is not God, that you're trying to fill the place of God with.
Yeah. It's all a bait and switch.
Right.
You know, because like Chris Stapleton has, I can't remember what the song is, but he says something like, the bottom of the bottle is always empty, you know, and that's a metaphor for all kinds of things. Your bank account runs out, it's empty, right? You can chase after all these things, but everything rots, everything rusts, right. Moth eats and destroys.
Right.
And yet we make that in our world today the end all be all of what it means to exist as a human.
Right.
Man, this is a heavy law text, a lot like last week. So somewhere we got to find a place to bring in the gospel. Last week's text was, there is no perfect man. And that for Tim and I, that kind of became our refrain of, there is no perfect man but Christ.
Right.
Right. We can't be perfect, but Christ is perfect.
Right.
And I think that gets us into, what verse do we stop at? 5? Yeah. Or do you suppose? Nope. We read that.
Yep. Start at 7.
7. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you.
I think it is law in that it's a polemic against everything that we try to fill that cross-shaped hole with.
Mm-hmm.
And that it is all selfish desires.
Yeah.
And so the wisdom from above is first pure, though, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. The good news is that the wisdom from above is Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, he is wisdom personified.
Right?
Yeah.
And that he has come to be merciful to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He has come and brought the law to humble you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are humbled, the Lord will exalt you.
Yeah.
He will exalt you out of your grave on the last day.
Yeah, and this is the upside down nature of God's kingdom, right? The kingdom of this world says, work hard, grow yourself, grow your bank account.
Work hard for yourself.
Right. Your neighbor never comes into the conversation.
Right. Work hard to build your empire.
Your little fiefdom.
Right. Whereas Christianity says, yes, go and work hard for the sake of your neighbor.
Yeah. And all these things might be added unto you.
Because God has taken care of all of your needs.
Yeah.
Have trust and faith that God is faithful to his promises because he is.
Yeah.
And so stop chasing after the worldly stuff. Trust that God's going to provide for you.
Yeah.
Regardless of what it looks like.
All right.
He's good. He is faithful.
Yeah. So this might be another opportunity for a compare and contrast, because that structure tends to work really well for these kinds of texts. What is James doing? He's contrasting what the world is going after versus what it looks like to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And again, this is written to pastors, but the wisdom of this does not end with the church leadership. This is wisdom for
sinners.
For sinners, yeah. For anybody in any vocation. Right?
Only the self-centered ones, though.
Yeah, all of us who are turned in on ourselves.
Yes.
Curved in on ourselves, which is all of us, if you didn't catch the joke, guys. Yeah, submit yourselves to God, though. But we have a real problem with submission.
Do you?
Yes, we do. We all do. We all do. And people don't like to resist the devil's temptations.
No.
I always quip about the old confession of sins in I don't remember which divine service it's in, but we use DS2 here. But the one where it says, I, a poor, miserable sinner. And it's like, well, some people have problems saying miserable because
they're enjoying their sin.
Yeah, because they're enjoying their sin.
Yes.
Sin's not often, like, the misery comes in the hangover.
Yeah.
Or the misery comes in the fallout of the sin.
Yeah.
Right. If sin wasn't quote unquote enjoyable, like, people wouldn't do it. But there's this draw to these, as James says, these passions and these pleasures that are at war within us. So we're drawn to those things, and they bring us this like momentary bliss, and it's like chasing the wind. It's gone.
Yeah.
Here now, gone now.
Yep.
But I think this would be a good one for compare and contrast. What other format might this?
I'm awful with sermon structures. Not my strength. Check out the blurb on Craft Preaching. I think we might be having a guest preacher for this walk through James. So check that out.
Oh, okay. That's good. But I don't think this is quite a paradox, but like it would almost feel like a paradox to the people in the pews. Like submission to God seems like I'm giving up a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like submission to God might mean giving up opportunities for your children because, well, we have church on Sunday.
Yeah.
And they're not going to play baseball today because we got to go to church.
Yeah.
Submission to God might mean I don't buy the bigger house because, well, my neighbor needs my help and I can't.
Well, you might buy the bigger house because you have more children.
Yeah, we might need a bigger house. But, you know, that feels like there's the draw that our people feel. And then it's like, what's the truth of this draw?
Yeah.
So I don't think a paradox maintained or a paradox whatever format would necessarily work, but
I think the compare and contrast, especially as we're going into this election season. Here we are in September, so another 6 weeks before the election.
Yeah.
Right. All of the time, energy, and effort that people are spending on this political season.
Yeah.
On electing their candidate. They're investing more in the next 4 years than in the eternal kingdom.
Yeah.
Right. And they're catechized more by the talking heads
Mm-hmm.
on TV talking politics
Yep.
than they are by the pastor that God has sent them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so,
Called and ordained servant of the word.
so in one sense, don't be chasing after the things of the world. Yes, go vote for the other guy, right? Go vote for how your neighbor is best loved and served.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, then go tell your neighbor about Jesus.
Yeah.
Because this is an eternal kingdom that ultimately matters.
Yeah.
Yes, your neighbor needs bread on their table,
Mm-hmm.
and those things are important. But don't forget to tell them about Jesus.
Yeah. And while you tell them about Jesus, don't be proud. Be humble.
Right. So it's not about power and control. It's about humbling yourselves and exalting Jesus.
Yeah. That's right.
Does that about do it this week?
I think it does. All right. Well, that should do it for today. We will go ahead and cut it off here. In the meantime, like, subscribe, and God bless your preaching.